Hello everyone, welcome back. We have our next session ready. It's SEL in Education and Appendage of Body by Ravi Gulati and Reshma Piramal. We have Ravi here who co-founded Manzil, a youth-led non-profit in Delhi over 20 years ago. And since then, he has been nurturing Manzil into a learning community where youth are at once learners and teachers. So Manzil has and continues to spawn and spin up numerous other social entrepreneurial and entrepreneurial youth initiatives. We also have Reshma Piramal here, who is heading the operations in South of SE Learning India. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming. Over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Great. So we're going to actually have a conversation, Ravi and I'm going to use this opportunity to ask Ravi. Ravi, you've been at Manzil and you founded Manzil, and it's been now 23 years that you've been in the space of education. And the population of kids or the students that you see are very similar to the kids that are at TFI. And most of them come from impoverished backgrounds or challenged backgrounds. You've been a very intuitive individual who's been informed by a view, and that's informed your understanding and hence your work in the education space. I was wondering if you could tell us something in terms of how did you see the need for SEL so early on?
So, I mean, I didn't know this buzzword, social emotional learning, until recently. But here are some of the things I noticed when I started working with children about 23 years ago. One was that, so I want to do a little bit of a backstory. I did personally, got to go to a good college, also did my MBA from a very good business school. But because of my own sort of searching, I did about 4 years of traveling throughout the country, in which so I was like kind of figuring out what is worth doing in life. And a lot of other learnings came through. And one of the important things I realized during those travels is that a lot of things that you learn in school, in formal situations, are not as useful, and a lot of things that are very useful do not find space in the formal curriculum. So when Manzil started, which happened accidentally, and these kids, started coming to me. The first one was about 12 or 13 years old. I was already aware that the education in India and the future of children, young people, there is a mismatch. In fact, even in terms of employment. So a very tiny sliver of people who go to the best institutions, they get opportunities in the working world. But otherwise, if you just a BA pass from somewhere, it doesn't make any difference. And if we have to help people for life and not just to pass their school and get a certificate and get into college, which is just means to a larger end. If we have to do that, we have to look at education in a broader way rather than just what is being done in school. So one of my examples that I would always think of at that time is, for example, I was always very good at math. It's important to crack the cat, so I'm good at math. Trigonometry is something that, we had all these things to prove. I don't know if you remember how
of course.
in maths, but, we had to do all these proofs, all kinds, and I was very good at it. But I've never ever used that in my life after that. Except for one, there's one exception. I've only used it when I'm helping someone else get through trigonometry in their 10th, right? So it's a very self-referencing kind of thing. Nothing to do with real life. Nothing wrong with getting more than what you need. You can have a portly, you can use it later. But there's a problem with getting what you're never going to use if what you are going to use and what you're going to need is not there because there's paucity of time. So for example, when I looked at the children, one of the things that kind of hits you right, like immediately, is that there are very difficult relationships that they're dealing with peers, of course, but also in their own families, with their own parents. So parents have a view of children as, kehna nahi mante, we are providing them so much, they're not taking full advantage of it. I don't know what's wrong with them. When I was their age, I couldn't go to school. I had to migrate from my village to the city to look for work, all of that. That's their thinking. Now, when you look at the children, they're saying like, they don't understand what's going on for me. They just demand things to be done in a certain way. So a lot of there's very little real communication happening in families, the exceptions apart, right? They all, although they all mean well for each other, but they cannot really even communicate and see that they are mean well for each other. So that's something to learn. That's not something that you're born with. Or something else that came up for me very early on. One incident that very early, I noticed this boy who was coming to me, and he was like bandaged. He was hurt. I said, "What happened?" He said, "No, nothing. We had a fight yesterday." I said, "You had a fight? What happened? Who were you fighting?" So no, not it was the whole group. There were these two colonies, Sujan Singh Park, and then there's a cemetery. The young people who lived there in our group, there was a fight. And I said, "What was the fight about?" He said, "I don't know." Hello? You don't know? Involved in a fight, you got injured. You don't know what the fight was about. He said, "No, when I was told that there's a fight happening and you must join, if I were to even ask what's the fight about, that's like putting a question mark on my loyalty to my colony, right?" So there's already these in-groups, out-groups forming, they're fighting. There's this false sense of bravado, belonging. I mean, there's some truth to it, but in a larger thing, it's like it's a lot informed by the films, by TV. Those are the kind of things I saw, and they were making poor decisions in life, and to make better decisions in life, clearly they had to understand their own emotions. They had to understand what's happening in their social interactions. And it was much more useful and much more immediate than the stuff they were learning in school. So that's how it kind of came into Manzil. It was important to the children. It was important for us.
Thank you. That's lovely. This resonates so much with and so deeply with what we at Sea Learning India are doing and what we've been observing, because largely what we see is the kind of thing that you spoke about, right? I mean, education equates to a good job or employability, but it doesn't necessarily give you those skills that are required to navigate through the ups and downs, your workspace, your work environment, home, etc. And I think largely, the word SEL has become, as you pointed out, such a buzzword. It's, almost as if it's that appendage, as we spoke, I mean, as the title says, to this whole process of learning, rather than it being core. We are to see really any kind of shift or, transformation, then leaving curriculum and content aside and, pedagogy, which is all very important. That's what largely educators are talking about. I think what we really need to see is building of these foundational practices that allow, for individuals, as you said, to flourish, to be resilient. And I think that's largely where these practices that I spoke about, that build this inner awareness, this awareness of self, this awareness and understanding of our emotions, the idea that, we have to navigate the external. And at the end of the day, we are part of a much larger community. These practices at Sea Learning, we call them enduring capabilities. And these capabilities can be cultivated. And I think that's really, really critical. So what we have is a framework that looks at, or rather moves from self to others to the community, which is, the larger system. And we have these three main themes, which is awareness, compassion, and at the end, engagement. And I think one of the important things to remember is that if an educator has to transfer any kind of information or knowledge, then it can't be a superficial transference. It has to be something that is embodied. There has to be a development of praxis. And I see that's where, our work in terms of fostering these communities of practice is so vital. And that's pretty much inbuilt into the Sea Learning program.
Yeah, no, you've said it very rightly. So this is, when we learn in school, if we know it, we've all been through it. We know how we are tested, what we've learned, right? There are questions, and then there are right answers, and you can memorize and write it, and you can get your marks and you can get your certificate. Yeah. But when we talk of something like social emotional learning, it's not about knowing the right answer. It's about living the right answer, right? and knowing and living are two completely different things. Again, it comes across in the Indian context, so it like hits you directly, right? For example, uh, one of the things that bothered me right from early days is we have these stated values.
Mm.
This is how we should live, and then we have these actually the lived values, and there can be huge gap between the two.
Yeah.
There's a couple of examples if I were to take. Uh, like when I talk to parents, सीखने की कोई उम्र नहीं होती. That's a very common thing held in India. Every age is a good age to learn, right? They would hold this opinion, but when one would encourage them to be involved with their children's learning and look at it, अब हमारी उम्र तो गुजर गई, अब हम क्या करेंगे, हमारे बच्चों को आप देख लीजिए, उनका कुछ हो जाए, अब हम क्या सीखेंगे, we're too old to learn.
Yeah.
There's a complete contradiction between the two. Or another one that really gets me, like, can't you see this? सब चीज बांटने से कम हो जाती है. You have something, you distribute, it becomes less. But एक ही चीज है जो बांटने से बढ़ती है, ज्ञान. So you must share whatever you learn. And then if I ask Manzil mein, we have young people as young as 11 being teachers. Sometimes the parents, not just sometimes, many times the parents say, you are learning yourself. Why are you teaching? Why are you spending your time teaching? Why don't you learn more? Right?
True.
So again, the lived value is to see it as first look after yourself, or I'm too old to learn. That's what matters. So for living your values, you have to notice and convert everyday opportunities to practice.
Yeah.
What that value is holding. That's the only way it turns into lived values. And that is something that Manzil being a community and we knowing each other, seeing each other, people have grown up here all the time. We've been able to call that out in each other. First thing is you have to live it yourself, because you cannot teach what you tell. We all know that. You can only teach who you are. So you have to be that yourself. So you put the spotlight on yourself, make sure that you're living the values that you state, and then you can then call it out for children also very gently, very lovingly. Call it out. And that's what we've done over and over again for any such movement to happen. Yeah. So, yeah. But, with the C learning, what got me really excited was all the science that came with it. I just did it very intuitively. I read the children read me, I made sense, it's all of those things. But the science behind it, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I find that fascinating.
Sure, I think that's a very relevant point you brought. And Ravi, I think that's what really sets this body of work apart. Just to give an example, and so for example, if we were to think of any stressful environment, and let's assume it's a classroom, and suddenly there's a math test being announced, or maybe even if it's a challenge that one is facing, like you've just mentioned, that those two rival groups, suddenly there's some skirmish that happens. Typically what happens is it's the executive functions, the judging, the analyzing, which basically process all this information, which happens in the prefrontal cortex. So if we were to imagine the prefrontal cortex as this fist in a hand, the moment one is faced with any challenge in life, what happens is immediately the frontal cortex as a drop, and what you have is you have the amygdala exposed, because the nervous system gets dysregulated. And what happens with this is you're just completely left at the mercy of your body, of the nervous system, of the panic, of all, and there is no opportunity to regulate. And think about this in a classroom. I mean, do you think any learning is going to happen if a kid is suddenly faced with a situation, however stressful it may be, or anxiety or whatever, we can judge that, they're just not going to be able to act. You might be like the best teacher possible. If there's not going to be any learning happening in class because of situations like this, then, I mean, whatever education one provides, it's not going to be of any benefit. And I think that's one of the important things that we see at C Learning, is that, this body of work has been very, very much informed by evidence and science. So while there already exists an ancient wisdom tradition, what we also recognize is that the contemporary contemplative sciences seem to articulate this in a manner in which it makes it accessible to everyone. So it gives you the why of it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So for example, what sets this curriculum apart from the evidence base, is the four things that you don't see in almost any other SEL program. And beginning with, for example, attention training, the idea that the mind needs to be focused first and needs to be workable, needs to be malleable, right? So if we had to kind of be aware of ourselves, be aware and understand our emotions, know how to react when we are faced with such situations, if there is no attention training that is provided, it's very impossible to expect that of any child or any adult as well. So that's one. The other thing is that it's a resiliency and trauma informed approach, and that's why we talk about this this prefrontal cortex and the amygdala being exposed. So it gives us tools and skills to actually regulate the nervous system, to bring us back into a space where we are not as reactive. So the choices we make are far more informed. So it's an inside out approach as well as an outside in approach. Typically one is always giving skills externally, but the idea is that they have to also come from within. And the other thing, apart from the attention training and the resiliency informed approach, that we see that's really, really key to this body of work, the social, emotional, ethical learning curriculum that was developed at Emory with the guidance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is the firm emphasis on the cultivation of compassion. And we've seen a humongous amount of research that shows that the altruistic thought, when you think about the self, vis-a-vis as a larger community, you see that there is a huge shift in the brain in terms of just your ability to adapt better, to be more responsive. And this cultivation of compassion is very, very key, because it kind of gives you not just a approach of self, but self in a larger context. And then the last one, which is largely also informed by the work of Peter Senge, who's been at MIT, who's been doing a lot of work in the systems area, the systems approach, looks at our understanding of our shared humanity, interconnectedness as being part of a larger community. And I think that's where the shift happens, because you suddenly move from self to the other. So it no longer is an intellectual exercise where it is like, hey, solve this problem or climate change. It kind of ends up being kind of inwardly led. And I see these four evidence informed approaches as really, really setting this body of work apart, because what it does is it actually gives you a toolkit. You're not, like you said, relying on intuition and values that you've grown up with. Yes, but how do you do it, and how does an educator do it, is something that can be practiced and cultivated. So yes, you're right. I mean, that's a really amazing feature that this body of work has. Very different from any other body that's there.
And I think the way you're going about it, because the curriculum was prepared, like ready a year ago, and it's all publicly available. It's fully open source, so anybody can download it.
Yes.
So what's the job of C-Learning India then? What are you there for? I think the way you're going about it is picking up on this point that the effectiveness of any cell program boils down to basically the embodiment of it in the children and everybody, in fact, in the learning space. And that doesn't happen by just knowledge. That doesn't happen by just knowledge. And whether that knowledge comes through some text that people read up or listen to or do some activities, these are all pedagogical approaches.
Yeah.
But essentially it has to get embodied. And how does that embodying happen? What supports it? Fostering these communities of practice. Those are the two things that you really, brought into that. And it makes the curriculum come alive rather than just being a dead document which somebody will use, somebody will not use. And even if somebody uses, may just do the activity. It's very easy to pick up the activities and do it. So I think that's where what you've got here, the embodiment and the communities of practice. And we also introduced SEAL now that it is there in Manzil.
Oh, wonderful.
Right. So the process is unfolding now, and I hope we can do things faster, better with this toolkit that is available. Please tell us a little bit more about how everybody can have access to it. I think we're coming to the end of our...
Yeah, sure. So we have a process, but everyone is welcome to reach out to us. I'll just going to share my screen here so that we can have access. You can get in touch with us. We have trainings We work with educators, we have study circles, but largely we can, you know, our approach is to familiarize educators with this body of work, understand it better, immerse themselves better. What you see up here is our framework, which I spoke about very briefly, where we move from a self or a personal to the systems approach. We cover awareness, compassion, and engagement. But do reach out to us if you're interested in exploring this, because this is a cultural shift. This is largely about embedding these practices in your schools, you know, organizations. It's, you don't have to largely, you know, do anything very different apart from really understand it so that you can take it into your classrooms in a manner in which is very natural. C Learning India's contact email addresses, where you can get in touch with us. We're happy to have orientations for anyone who's interested.